Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to be getting into a massive systematic review and network meta-analysis on intermittent fasting for prevention of cardiovascular disease risks. So this is out of the Current Nutrition Reports. It was just released this year in July of 2025. So we are going to break that down, share the limitations, share the big takeaways, and most importantly, adapt it to your fasting lifestyle. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. If you want to know more about how fasting has transformed my life, how it transformed Tommy's life, and now tens of thousands of other folks over the last 5 years, and why we do what we do week in and week out with a podcast episode drop, as well as the resources on the website, the upcoming last challenge of the year coming up strategically placed right before Thanksgiving, and why we just care about this fasting lifestyle adaptation. Head back to episode 1 or episode 0, give it a listen. It'll give you some insight into who we are, how fasting helped us, and ultimately why we do what we do week in and week out. For you long-term OGs, welcome back to another episode. Excited to be on this fasting lifestyle journey with you. Tommy, I want to give a shout out to Rick WW, and he titles his 5-star review, self-aggrandizing, our favorite kind, because we love our 5-star reviews. And he says, I've been doing IF on and off for a couple years. From my highest weight, I'm down 55 pounds.
Wow.
Rick WW, shout out, man, for doing the work. Incredible. I follow quite a few people online, but recently found your show. I'm an instant fan. Thank you, Rick. The emphasis on lifestyle is subtle, but so important in the difference in the mindset. The default thinking of it as a positive improvement instead of being deprived of something is so important. I have a lot of episodes to catch up on. Thank you. No, Rick.
Wow.
WW, thank you for listening in. Thank you for stumbling upon our show. We are grateful for you taking the time and leaving us our favorite 5-star review. And just once again, shout out for 55 pounds, Tommy. But the thing that he mentions there is maybe we don't double down enough on the Fasting for Life podcast and this lifestyle adaptation. But that's the reality of it. You know, that's what we're going to talk about with today's research debrief is how do you put this into your lifestyle and how do you adapt it long term so it just doesn't become another diet, right?
Agreed. And, you know, life is full of opportunities, but every day, like we're wired towards worst case scenario prevention. We're wired towards avoiding fear and discomfort. And so that tends to be kind of our default thinking pattern. And the diet roller coaster really kind of doubles down on that with fear, shame, regret cycles around, like, you know, getting smacked in the face by the scale, the food choice that I wish I didn't make, all of these kind of things. And then we can just take that same deprivation mentality and bring it over into fasting and make fasting our next diet because we're just thinking about just saying no to everything for a while. But so Rick, thank you for highlighting the fact that when we're looking forward to the benefits of our fast and the reason why we're saying not yet to that next meal, rather than just saying no, we're really saying yes to our long-term goals. We're really saying yes to ourselves in a different way, just with a little bit of a longer output, a longer timeline on it, rather than just the very short term, right? Which is amazing, and we're just kind of trading in those results right there, so we can get better rewards in the long term.
So, I love this study. And there are limitations to it, which we'll get over. But I want to really take that big picture approach of why does this matter? So why do you come to fasting? Why do you stumble upon our podcast like Rick WW, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, ultimately, most people come to fasting because it's a form of weight loss strategy, right? You ultimately want to lose weight. Well, why do you want to lose the weight?
Mm-hmm.
Well, not just because your doctor said, or inherently you want to lose the 20 pounds or 30 pounds, or that the weight in itself in a momentary, like real life moment isn't a detrimental issue to your health, but long term it has the drastic effect of driving the chronic lifestyle epidemics that we have here in the U.S. and now that we're seeing globally. The statistics don't lie. 75% of the population is overweight or obese. We have more heart disease than ever before, even though we're spending trillions of dollars a year in medications and all this great medical technology, but yet we're still struggling with chronic lifestyle conditions. And the reality is, and then that leads to metabolic syndrome and comorbidities and all these other issues and diabetes. And so the reality is that most people, want to prevent that from happening, but the stats show that we clearly struggle with this from a calorie in, calorie out, eat less, move more diet mentality. So for us, fasting is like the superpower. It's the vehicle that you take on the journey to ultimate weight loss and health goals and longevity and reversal of disease and prevention of disease and all of those big future problems, or maybe you're dealing with them now that you want another option because what you're currently doing isn't working and you're on that diet cycle, regain, train mentality. So with fasting, and why we want to talk about the study and kind of break it down is, ultimately you come to weight loss, but why not double down? And we've done this so many times in the past on so many episodes where we talk about the metabolic benefits of fasting compared to the weight loss benefits of fasting. So when we're looking at this, looking at heart disease, the number one reason why people die here in the US, right, in terms of cardiovascular disease, even though we have more cholesterol and blood pressure and medications and all that medical stuff that I mentioned, the reality is that it may not be your fault, but it's still your problem. So how do we give you the tools to adapt this to a lifestyle, to Rick's point? That's ultimately what we want to do. That's why we do the challenges and the coaching and all the things that we do, is to pull you out of the matrix and say, hey, this is what we did. This is what we've seen in tens of thousands of folks up until this point that we've worked with. And now we want to give you a structure. So we do that through looking at the data and the research and then extrapolating it out to real life situations. So this meta-analysis in the current nutrition reports, it's one of the most comprehensive evaluations to date comparing intermittent fasting modalities. So we're specifically going to look at today, Tommy, alternate day fasting or modified ADF, right, which we'll explain, periodic fasting, aka the 5-2 diet, or we're going to name it sporadic fasting or fast freelancing or gratuitous grazing or weekend warrioring, which is our fasting types that we've created, these three kind of buckets that people fall into.
Yeah, and it probably mostly falls into weekend warrioring too, because it's set up just in the name 5-2. It's set up for a real dichotomy between weekday and weekend, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're gonna compare that to the 80% rule, which is what we teach. And then time restricted eating, which is just aka intermittent fasting, right? Where you're putting boundaries on when you're consuming nutrition for those days. And we're going to look at all those it looks at all those different types of fasting on cardiometabolic risk reduction. This is 56 randomized controlled trials from 2013 all the way through 2024. And here's the key takeaway. Both modified ADF and TRE, so fasting, intermittent fasting, appear to be the most effective strategies for decreasing key cardiometabolic risks, which outperform standard diets and in some cases matching or surpassing continuous calorie restriction. So eat less, move more, right? Let's look at the pros, and we'll go over the cons.
Okay, let's do it.
Do you have something you want to add there?
Just the fact that when we put that line in the sand between continuous caloric restriction versus intermittent fasting, that's an easy time where a lot of times we hear, well, intermittent fasting is just a form of caloric restriction, and that's fine. A lot of the net benefit might be because of that, but you have a couple of really, really important physiological and psychological benefits that I just wanted to quickly mention here too. One being the fact that when we put deliberate time restriction between our meals, the additional physiological benefit that we get is actually the reduction in both blood sugar as well as insulin. Insulin being the fat storage hormone. So
Right.
it's not just about the caloric restriction, it's also about that reduction in overall baseline insulin levels during that time when we're not intaking food. And then the other one being the psychological benefit that the simplicity of fasting within some sort of time restricted period where you have a nutrition opportunity window, an eating window, if you will, or maybe it's a single meal on one day, like an OMAD, a 1 meal a day strategy one day. That simplicity lends itself to less frustration, less analysis paralysis,
Right.
having to micromanage all of the macronutrients and the calories. So there's additional benefits besides just the caloric restriction.
Now, anyone out there, raise your hand, right? If you're driving, keep your hands on the wheel, but give us a head nod, right? That if you've done the calorie in, calorie out, calorie restriction, tracking macros, counting calories, cardio, elliptical steps, equations before.
Done it.
With short-term results or sometimes not short-term results, and then just frustration and give up and repeat the cycle, right? And that's ultimately why fasting was such a superpower, for us when we read Dr. Fung's book and then applied it in a different way, knowing that, oh, hey, like, let's take a look at this hormone side or this energy output side or this metabolic, where you are in a metabolic profile, like where you are on your metabolic journey, right? Like, how is your body processing blood sugar?
Mm-hmm.
How is your body, where are you on the insulin resistant spectrum?
Right.
And looking at different metrics rather than just your standard labs, which leads to what we know is the stats that I shared earlier and ultimate long-term health outcomes. So when we look at this study, the comprehensive scope, so the pros of the study, it's 56 randomized controlled trials, about 4,000 participants, diverse population, 16 countries. The cool thing about this was the gold standard is really this systematic review meta-analysis, but what they used here was a frequentist framework, which is going to integrate both direct and indirect evidence, allowing for comparative effectiveness rankings. So it's going to give us, which traditional meta-analyses don't give us, it's going to give us this comparative, like, which one's better? And that's ultimately what we want, because then we want to distill that down to you and then give you some action steps. They utilized a grade system, which is rating evidence for each outcome as high, moderate, or low certainty, which is an improvement over earlier reviews. It looks at the objective biomarkers, so cardiometabolic endpoints, body weight, waist circumference, which is direct correlation to visceral fat, systolic, diastolic blood pressure, fasting glucose, LDL-C, and fat-free mass, right? So all long-term health metrics that drive health outcomes. And then there was also a sensitivity analysis where even after they removed the studies with diabetics or high bias, this still supports the robustness of modified ADF and time-restricted eating, aka intermittent fasting, on most of the outcomes. So really solid evidence. Now, there were 1/3 of the studies that had methodological limitations. Mainly in randomization and missing data. There were short intervention durations, so many trials lasted less than 12 weeks. There were very few that had direct comparisons between modified and TRE. So this was forcing a reliance on the indirect evidence, so that comparative analysis. There was a concern over lean muscle mass, and we'll talk about that. And then the time-restricted eating windows, aka the fasting windows, varied, right? So there were just variations across all of those studies, which we see in the research and all the articles that we've looked at. So the main fasting findings here, Tommy, were that modified ADF. So can we describe modified ADF first?
Sure, yeah. ADF starts with alternate day fasting, where there's fasting one day, so a full flame day, no calorie, no nutrition coming in one day, and then a 100% of my nutrition needs the next day, and in an alternating pattern. But typically in the research studies, They don't typically use that as like a strict alternate day fasting protocol. What they do is a modified ADF, where on those flame days, those burn days, they would actually bring in, usually it's somewhere around 4, 5, or 600 calories. Sometimes they do 400 calories for women, 500 or 600 calories for men. And then that would be, so one mini meal is typically how we think about that. And then so that would be one day, like Monday, and then on Tuesday would be a full 100% nutrition day, and then Wednesday would be back to the 4 or 5 or 600 calorie mini meal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
And then TRE is just your intermittent fasting window. So 16-8, 18-6, 24, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the outcomes of the benefits of what was found in this study, we look directly at remember we talked about the high, the moderate, and the low certainty, right, of the results. So modified ADF had high evidence certainty for body weight reduction. The average was 5.18 kilograms, so over 10 pounds.
Wow.
Waist circumference decreased by 3.5 centimeters. Systolic blood pressure came down 7 points. Diastolic came down 4, almost 5 points. So this was the most effective overall for composite cardiometabolic reduction and significant blood pressure improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So TRE, example 16-8 fasting windows, this was the strongest high evidence certainty for strong glucose lowering and blood pressure effects, best daily adherence potential. And we're going to talk about that because we want to apply this to your day-to-day life and your fasting journey. Mm-hmm. So this was the high certainty for fasting. Plasma glucose came down almost 4 points. Blood diastolic came down just over 3 points. Waist circumference, similar to the ADF, came down at 3 centimeters.
Okay.
The ADF schedule in itself, which is the full fasting day, full nutrition day, full fasting day, full nutrition day without that AK mini meal that we talk about, that had a moderate certainty of evidence with a weight loss of 4.27 kilograms, so just over 8 pounds. And this was effective for weight, but didn't show the added cardiometabolic benefit. And looking at it, it seems to be the fact that there were the shorter studies, and those studies had a little bit more of that bias or that lack of consistent reporting that we saw. Because we've seen other studies that we've done with ADF, and we've done this on other episodes, where there is definitely an improvement in those metabolic markers, right?
Yeah, because so when we're moving up, we use the term fire factor, or like the burn rate, like how many calories would you actually be burning over a given number, or a given number of fasting hours. So when you think about this less as sporadic fasting and more of fast cycling, where we're actually linking these fasts together in a consistent way, then we can start to look at it in a more standardized kind of way. So TRE would be lowest on the list, and then modified ADF would be next, and then ADF would have the highest burn rate, the highest like fire factor right there. So what I mean, or why that's important, is because most studies, like I said, do not use a strict alternate day fasting. So that's going to be a very small number of the studies. So it's gonna have like actual low sample size bias. You're also going to have some biases towards the actual study design, unfortunately, because there are so few. Because in all of the research that's out there, over 95% of the studies are going to be modified ADF versus like the very, very small minority being actual strict ADF. So take that into consideration. And then also that's to say nothing so far about the actual nutrition choices here. Right. Because when you get into what we know, ADF, so strict alternate day fasting, is a very, very effective fasting protocol.
It's also difficult to stick to.
That's exactly where I was going.
Oh, okay.
The adherence of it is much more difficult than a modified version, and that's actually, I think, why they use a modified version for the research protocols, because it's much easier to adhere to. Yeah, you could potentially do multiple weeks with fairly good compliance on modified ADF, but there's a superpower that very few of us mere mortals have, to continue with a strict alternate day fasting without those mini meals for any really appreciable length of time.
Yeah, and we see that inside of our coaching too, where we use modified ADF or an ADF schedule, usually once every 6 to 8 weeks as we cycle through. And we'll talk about fast cycling and all of the practical takeaways for a fasting for life application here in just a few minutes. Mm-hmm. I want to round out the rest of the results. So then they looked at the periodic fasting. We're going to call that in a few minutes sporadic fasting.
Yeah.
Or fasting types. We have a fasting types PDF that kind of outlines like which bucket, what type of faster are you? So we'll talk about sporadic fasting. That's the 5-2 diet. So 2 days of fasting, not back to back, and then 5 days of just ad libitum eating. Interestingly enough, this was high confidence in the data. It was useful for lipid improvement, but very much less potent for glucose or blood pressure, which kind of makes sense, right? You're making better food choices a couple of days a week. You're kind of on it. You probably have some intention into the other 5 days. You're not just willy-nillying it, right? So that was an interesting finding. LDL came down and the waist circumference still decreased, but not as much. And then the continuous restriction. So this is calorie restriction. Eat less, move more. Set your calorie deficit at 500 per day. Extrapolate that over 7 days, over a month, over 6 months. Right, and you just put the math into the equation, and boom, it spits out a result, and that's ultimately what you should see on the scale.
Sure.
That's not taking into account the insulin resistance, your metabolic state that you're currently in, and how much energy you burn, how active you are, how your sleep and stress are, et cetera, et cetera.
Also motivation and,
right?
And adherence over time.
Yep. So this is the continuous eat less, move more calorie restriction. This had high confidence in the results as well. It says remains competitive, but adherence may be more difficult long-term.
Right.
So the weight did come down, much less than the other two groups, came down 3 kilograms, so just about 6 pounds, and the systolic did come down a few points as well.
Okay.
But this is that adherence piece, right? This is why we started the conversation with dieting. Why do you come to fasting? Well, ultimately you want to lose weight. Yes, there are so many other health benefits and longevity benefits to it as well.
Or keep it off.
Or ultimately keep the weight off, right? So it remains competitive, but the adherence piece is what we're really going to talk about. And so many of us have those skeletons in our closet with failing through those approaches over the years. Very few people that I've come across that I met, I'm actually married to one, that can stick to tracking and planning and weighing and all of that stuff day over day. It just works for her. Maybe it's her Enneagram type. I don't know. But that's where she sees the most benefit. So let's talk about this idea of the mechanisms of why the results showed what they did. And then we'll talk about the practical takeaways. So we want to talk about this idea of this metabolic switch, right? So, and this idea of fast cycling. So stacking consistent fasting efforts over and over, and we'll give you those windows and times in a few minutes. But the idea here is that fasting transitions energy metabolism from glucose to fat and ketone oxidation. You have two fuel sources in the body. You've got glucose, or short-term energy stores in the form of glycogen that then get broken down into glucose for energy that gets shuttled into the cell. And then we have the opposite, which is when you're glucose depleted or glycogen depleted, your body creates ketones. Right? This is a really, really great energy source. The brain loves it. And you get that euphoric feeling when you broke through a fasting wall and you're like, oh, I feel amazing. I'm not hungry. I've got energy. My brain is clear, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. You tapped into those long-term fat stores.
That's ketones. So we want to talk about this metabolic flexibility or flipping that switch in relationship to insulin as the fat storage or fat burning kind of light switch. Now, it's not an on and off. It's always a gradual kind of flow. But we ultimately want decreased insulin resistance and increased insulin sensitivity. So this switch likely underpins the reductions in the glucose, the adiposity, and the blood pressure observed when we look at the high confidence results from the time-restricted eating, aka intermittent fasting, and the modified ADF schedule. So the practical takeaways is this modified ADF is sustainable, right? It's going to produce the greatest magnitude of change in weight and blood pressure. And this is really useful for folks that have visceral fat, the belly, the lower abdomen, hips, and thighs, right? And if you have this blood pressure creep, which you and I both had, right, trying it the old way before we came to Dr. Fung and intermittent fasting and fast cycling and all the stuff since those 5 years ago. And so if you have that visceral adiposity and the hypertension, that's that metabolically active fat. So modified ADF is incredibly powerful. And if you combine that with intermittent fasting, we'll talk about fast cycling and how to stack these in a minute. This is where you're going to get that superior daily sustainability and effectiveness for glucose and the second half of the blood pressure, the diastolic part of the equation. So it's ideal for maintenance, TRE, intermittent fasting, and or if you've got prediabetes or blood sugar issues or you want to reverse diabetes, consistent daily sustainability is what we see that wins long term, right?
Yeah. And when we're talking about actually maximizing that metabolic switch, our food choices matter with that too. So when we're making intentional food choices, when we're prioritizing protein, when we're shooting for that 40-40-20 breakdown, macronutrient breakdown, where 40% of our nutrition is coming from protein, 40% from fat, 20% from carbohydrates, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but when we're shooting for that on our plate, then what we're doing is we're actually maximizing the usage of that metabolic switch. We're making the next fast that much easier because we're not fully repleting those glycogen stores. We're not going fully back into carbohydrate burning before the next fast, which is then gonna require a bigger swing to go back into fat burning, into that ketogenic state, into where we see those ketones start to rise. So when we're doing that and we're kind of controlling the insulin output, it's making that next fast that much easier, and that's where we really start to see the benefits of fast cycling. And we're going to be talking about this much more in the upcoming challenge too. But when we focus on fast cycling rather than sporadic fasting, what we're doing is we're seeing less scale volatility, which then means less motivational volatility too. So it's protective of the mindset, and we're also feeling like this fast is easier. So it feels like it's easier to set my next fasting timer, which then means my probability of success and my probability of seeing new lows on the scale or maintaining control over the scale is that much more likely. And when we combine that with something like a modified ADF schedule or very, very consistent time restricted feeding as well, especially as we start to get in less out of the 14-10, 16-8 kind of range, and we start to get more towards that warrior side of things where we're a 20-hour fast with a 4-hour nutrition opportunity, then we start to get some really good burn time in there so that insulin can come down, and then we're starting to tap into those long-term fat stores more consistently, which is why we're seeing these results from this study where the blood sugar starts to come down. The systolic and diastolic blood pressure start to come down as well. And we're starting to see this balancing of this blood work. Well, extrapolate that over a few weeks and then into a few months with consistency. Now we're seeing the transformation. Now we're seeing like your physiology and your anthropometrics and your body composition just start to transform. So this is what really accelerated the process for you and me. And this is why like this study is so great, but on the surface, it quickly talks about some of the limitations within the systemic review, but we understand why these limitations were there. So we can kind of pick apart where the beneficial effects come from, and we can just double down on those. We don't have to use all of the methods and the specifics that then led to the slowdown of results in some of these categories right here.
Right.
We can just focus on all of the ones that worked, right?
So let me summarize the takeaways from the data. Then we'll talk about that food nutrition component and how this really highlighted fasting versus nutrition, because there wasn't a lot of guidelines in a lot of these studies, which is something that we actually probably, the house always wins. We'll put more stock in the nutrition eating windows that you have than the fasting windows that you have after you've gotten some fasting repetitions under your belt. But the biggest takeaway from the study is, in regards to real-world cardiometabolic risk reduction, modified ADF and intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, outperform conventional calorie restriction, and modified ADF leads in overall potency, hands down. TRE, time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting windows, 18-6, 16-8, 24, the warrior that Tommy was just talking about, TRE wins on adherence and blood sugar regulation. So we're going to transition into talking about how you can apply both of those, and get the best of both worlds. Because we want both, because we want cardiovascular prevention with lifestyle frameworks, right? So this is all supported from this study through the moderate to high certainty evidence. Now, the one limitation is that a lot of these studies were less than 1 year. So we have a lot of N equals 1 anecdotal things from all the people that we've helped, and 6,500 people through our challenges, and hundreds and hundreds of coaching folks at this point. So we'll talk about this concept of fast cycling and how to apply this to your day-to-day fasting lifestyle here for about 10 minutes, and we'll wrap up the episode. But when we look at one of the limitations on this, is the meta-analysis review didn't really standardize or tightly control food quality, macronutrient breakdown, or dietary choices.
Right.
So it really just focused on the vehicle of fasting, which is the timing, the frequency, and then if you're in the calorie restriction group, really just looking at the intermittent fasting or time restricted eating timing. So fasting at its core, and really let the participants eat ad libitum or follow their usual dietary pattern. So when we look at it, we know that modified ADF gives you that 400 to 600 calorie kind of mini meal. We know that TRE was anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. So those are kind of shorter fasting windows, in our opinion, right? If you're looking at 16-8 as kind of a baseline, right?
Sure. As a baseline, very, very good. And that's going to be the foundation for fast cycling right there. But at the same time, number of hours to actually get the insulin to come down, and then number of hours to go between those meals, and not have the nutrition opportunity window be so big that you can fit in, most of the nutrition for the day that you need right there. It tends to be a good balance point. That tends to be a good, that might be a really good maintenance fast for a lot of folks. So if you're looking for the scale to move down, it might not get you there.
So the big takeaway here is the implication from this is findings reflect fasting, not diet quality.
Agreed.
Right? So that should be very empowering, because what we don't want is you to feel deprived, to Rick's point when he gave us the shout out, is the lifestyle. Painting yourself in a corner and feeling deprived all the time and having the fear of missing out and not being able to enjoy pizza night with the kids or popcorn movie night with the family or the next birthday celebration coming up. Man, that just sucks long term, right? Because you get the guilt shame cycle and the willpower conversation and all that stuff. So the limitations to the real world here is that if you're consistently maintaining poor food quality or high processed food intake, fasting is probably not going to solve the problem for you. You do need to take into account both sides of the equation, the fasting and the food.
Sure.
So if you layer in better food choices, one better, protein-paced meal, micronutrients, minerals, healthy salts, the mineral salts that we talk about, that's really going to amplify the benefits of what we're seeing here in the data with this study.
Yeah, good point.
So let's talk, Tommy, about the application for real-world fasting, and this idea of what we talk about is called fast cycling. So this is where, if we just think of this like a baseline, 16-8 baseline standard. This is your baseline time-restricted eating, time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, what we just talked about in the study, with your kind of modified ADF or your weekly 24 to 48 hour fast, aiming, what we like to aim for is not perfection, but an 80% rule. That's going to leverage logically the strengths of the TRE, structured fasting, as well as the additional metabolic benefits of the modified ADF, and give you the sustainability and the adherence of those intermittent fasting, consistent, fast windows day after day. So when we talk about fast cycling, it's really going to tap into this metabolic adaptation conversation. You're going to stack the efficiency. And then we talk about consistency versus what we call sporadic fasting, where you're kind of just dabbling. And that's where we have the fasting types conversation. Are you a grazer, where you don't close your windows cleanly, or you kind of have a little snack here or there, not really clean fast? Or you're a weekend warrior, where you're great Monday to Thursday and then Friday through Saturday, which is almost half of your week if you start with a Thursday happy hour. Right as the end of the week comes up and you're off the wagon on the weekend, and then you have to get back on track on Monday. Or
which is tough.
Or the freelancer, where you're just like, I'll willpower it, I'll white knuckle it, I'll figure it out in the moment when it comes to food. That's really the consistency versus sporadic fasting conversation that we have. So we really believe that you can stack both of these to get the most benefit.
Yeah. So, and then when we think about, let's say 16-8 as a good baseline, you really want something where you go, you know what? Most days I'm going to be doing that because I know I'm going to feel better than if I'm just randomly kind of haphazardy with my 2, 3, 4 nutrition opportunities each day. Even if they are calculated and quality nutrition, I'm still going to be raising insulin levels. I'm still going to be focused on digestion mode rather than rest, repair, healing, anti-inflammatory, lower insulin mode. So if you had no weight that you needed to lose, you might be doing okay there. But for a lot of us adults, we would still be kind of seeing a slow trickle up of the scale if that's how we're going about. Like, because that's how most of my friends and family who aren't fasters, that's pretty much where they are. It's usually like they're conscious of food choices, but at the same time, it's usually 3 or 4 eating opportunities each day, and without like a deliberate fasting window there. And usually the scale's kind of moving up very slowly, and that's just how it's going
Or
to
you're
continue.
ping-ponging that same 3 to 5 pounds every week, right?
Yeah, because it might be combined with maybe a few days where you string together just really strict diet adherence, or maybe an OMAD or a TMAD, that kind of thing, where you have 1 or 2 meals deliberately every once in a while. So this is a very sporadic way to think about it. But if we can shift that to raise our standard to go, you know what? I want something to kind of be more of my baseline. And if that was around a 16.8, something that I feel like I could pull off, maybe not just easily, but without a whole lot of effort, then that would be a good baseline for me, because I'm probably going to maintain a pretty good level of control over the scale when I have that as my baseline. But from there, it's a very small step to a few more fasting hours, to getting that insulin level even lower, to having that fasting morning blood sugar even come down a bit more, and maybe
to see your cravings be better, to see your
yeah,
hunger cues be in check, right? To
right.
make those decisions on a day-to-day basis just feel easier.
Because you've already you've already moved the big boulder by just having that baseline. And so it's just a really small step away from that to go, you know what, maybe today's an OMAD. Or, hey, it just got a little bit later. Whoops, it's a little bit too late. I don't want to be having dinner after 6 o'clock because I know I'm not going to feel as well, and I know I'm not going to recover as well tomorrow. And then my cravings are going to be kicked up tomorrow. Let me just skip dinner tonight. So then all of a sudden, I just went into a 28 or a 36-hour fast, just like that, without even a whole lot of thought, because of my baseline. This is where the magic of fast cycling really kind of comes into play. And this is where we see some of the results of a study like this, but that we can double down on what's working, and we can leverage some of the, well, I'm already doing this. I already have my foot in the door. So maybe just a little bit more in this direction, put my foot on the gas a little bit, pour a little gasoline on the fire. And then extraordinary results are like just right around the corner, right? Versus maintaining and feeling like I'm doing something, but I'm not really seeing the transformational results that I'm looking for.
Yeah, and we want to just hit this, this idea of like what is the most consistent thing? What's the best fasting schedule? What's the best workout plan? What's the best financial strategy for retirement? Well, the one you're going to stick to and follow through on, right? So if we can tap into the metabolic adaptation of what we call fast cycling, like stacking these consistent fasts and setting 16.8 as a baseline, you're going to get that switch from glucose, sugar burner, craving, hunger cues to fat oxidation, fat burning, and ketone production, right? So that's going to give you the improved insulin sensitivity and the cardiometabolic benefits. And then if you stack the efficacy, you're going to combine those baseline 16, 18, 6, 24 with your once a week, twice a week, 24 to 48 hour fast, which is the actual modified ADF schedule, and even giving yourself some bumpers on the bowling alley rails, right? If you go bowling with kids, where you have that little mini meal, if you're having a really tough day or sleep sucked or stress is high,
Sure.
that you actually can still do that and get the benefit.
And not feel guilty about it.
And not feel guilty about it, right? Because you're still sticking to the plan. That's going to give you the body weight, waist circumference, blood pressure, glucose, benefits as well. So what we typically see is when a lot of folks come to our challenges, and the next one's coming up the week before Thanksgiving, so you can head to the show notes, click the link. It's the last one we're doing this year, strategically placed right before the holidays.
Yep.
Is really, how do we build that consistency? How do we use a certain schedule to kind of ramp up into this consistent fast cycling or fast stacking behavior, so you're not dabbling, you're not on and off day to day. You're not saying, all right, I'm going to do a 24-hour fast today, and then you find yourself eating lunch, and you're like, what the hell just happened? So we don't need perfection. We need 80%, right? We just need to hit a bunch of singles rather than swinging for the fences, right? So that's going to give you the best benefit from what we saw in the data from the study is, well, how do you apply this? Well, that's why we have the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. It's a free resource. It's in the show notes. It's a 20-page PDF. It gives you different fasting schedules. But if you're tired of like kind of being on the hamster wheel yourself, then come join us in the next challenge. Because what we want to do is we want to give you the tools for that long-term sustainability, which is where we started today's conversation, which is how do we adapt this to Rick's point? How do we make this a lifestyle? How do we shift that mindset? Why do we ultimately want to lose the weight? And then most importantly, how do we put that into our day-to-day action steps? Well, we need to create, systems. You need to create, a repeatability factor. So you're not always constantly, just doubling down on that willpower muscle, which is finite, as we know, especially when sleep and stress and life and holidays and all this stuff gets you. You're just kind of more likely to give in because willpower runs out pretty quick, especially if you've been flip-flopping the last few pounds or you haven't found some consistency, or maybe you lost a bunch of weight and now you're struggling to keep it off, or you've hit the dreaded plateau. Ultimately, we want to take this approach of creating that metabolic rhythm, like balancing those periods of the more, the longer 24 to 48 hour modified ADF fast with some more consistent baseline 16, 18 hour, 20 hour fast. That's where you're going to stack those benefits. And that's what we see in the study from today as well, Tommy.
Yeah, and that way we can steer away from needing to wait for that next willpower or motivation burst, because those are so sporadic, they're unpredictable. Usually they're based on some level of growing frustration that takes time, but it also takes seeing the scale going up to get that frustration up too. So it's like I have to take all these steps backwards.
The dissatisfaction factor.
Right. Just to be dissatisfied enough to get the motivation back. No, we have to steer away from that and just start with small actions that then lead to a feedback loop. So taking small daily actions rather than waiting for the motivation to hit, that's where the magic happens. That's where we can lever fast cycling and where we actually want to be for our long-term goals and actually start making consistent progress towards it, rather than the dumb diet roller coaster that we all have, unfortunately, so much experience with.
Yeah, so as we wrap up today, what's the main takeaway? Well, consistency wins, right?
For sure.
Two things we failed to mention is, one, that's why we teach and preach prioritizing protein, right? And or resistance training and walking.
Hey, I said 40% protein.
Yeah, 40%. Oh, you
exactly.
did. That's right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
We just we didn't stop there for a second and really hammer that one home, but we do often. We did a lot of studies earlier this year about studies that actually were, because most of the studies out there have more of a standard American diet macronutrient profile.
Yes.
50, 55% carb, 15, maybe 20% protein, and then the rest fat. Where some of the studies earlier this year were 35% and 40% protein, and the results were just astounding. So
of course they were. Yeah.
Yeah. So really, we want to focus on the day-to-day behaviors, the structured plan, and setting that baseline of the time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, and then stacking those longer fasts on top, which is what we found inside of coaching in our challenges, to really move the needle, not just on the scale, but also give you that motivation and that buzz of like, all right, this is fun. I can do this. Fasting is the vehicle for my long-term solutions that I want, or my long-term goals. And ultimately, that's what we're working on. That's what we've helped so many people do. And that's ultimately what we want for you as well. So Tommy,
absolutely,
truly appreciate the conversation, man. If you're looking for links to resources or the upcoming challenge, head to the show notes, click a link. If you've got questions, email us, info@thefastingforlife.com. Appreciate the conversation as always, man. And we will talk soon.
Thank you. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.